You've reached FIT TV. Stick around. We'll be right back. Fresh off the heels of the 2010 election overthrow of the House by Republicans, a new emerging Tea Party has staked a claim on the results. A message was sent to politicians in Washington: shape up or you're out. Washington, on both sides of the aisle, the times they are a-changing. The subject I have is the 2010 Tea Party and Republican resurgence, and I have two experts. I have Phil Curcio, who's a conservative and an attorney for the former lobbyist for the fishing industry. And on his left, Pete Nichols, who's the co-founder of the SaveHuntington.com. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's try to at least give the public an opportunity to see what the Tea Party is about and why it came about. Either one of you.
Well, I mean, I would say the Tea Party is a response to a growing fear in the grassroots American public that government has become non-responsive to the concerns of grassroots America. Fiscal problems, political power grabs, those kinds of things. And I believe that the Tea Party is an indication that the American public has awoken and is attempting to reassert its authority over the government. It is a government by the people and for the people.
It's a message from the people, then, basically, you're saying, right?
That's the way I read it.
Well, I think if you've ever been to any Tea Party events, I've been to, I think, only one or two in the beginnings when they started having. There was one here in Hauppauge. One thing that I noticed is that there was a lot of, I guess you would refer to them as right-wing people. People who were anti-abortion, people who were very much in favor of some sort of religious dogma being put back into government. They're very, I guess, right-wing Christians.
They would call it the Christian right.
Yeah, I mean, that is pervasive throughout the Tea Party, and you have to be very careful with, what you consider the Tea Party, because there are many people. You have libertarians, you have conservatives, you have Republicans, you have Ayn Rand objectivists. All these people all come together, for a common cause, and it's really to sort of roll back some of the programs, to roll back the New Deal, basically, of the 2000s that Obama is pushing. And I think if Obama didn't push so hard and so fast, you never would have seen a Tea Party. And you combine that with the economic collapse in 2008, 2009, that is what really sort of generated a mass uprising of people. But there are many different groups, and they're all competing with each other to get the attention of any politician that will carry their banner.
Do you think it was kind of a reflective spin-off, basically, of Obama's pushing too hard?
Right, and I think that Obama had just appointed a new chief of staff, William Daley, who's has some business experience and background. He's extensive background. You're not going to see the giant rallies in Washington like we did last year. Those, especially now since we have a Republican-controlled House of Representatives. But what you're going to see is a lot of people paying more attention to what's actually going on, because the Republicans sort of were the carpetbaggers. They lambasted the Democrats as being the party of big government, and you can really say that, the Republicans were just as bad as the Democrats spending in the 2000s. I mean, the deficits that were run up were just astronomical. The defense spending was unbelievable.
Wasn't that abnormal, though, for the Republicans to go whole hog on the government spending issues? Wasn't that abnormal?
Well, don't forget the people that are involved with this are politicians, and they'll lie, steal, and cheat to get elected. They'll do anything. I mean, you look at a local level, some of the things that go on. You have school board members that are spending $10,000, $20,000 to get elected to a non-paying position. So you're going to see a lot of, I think, fighting in the Tea Party, and you're going to see the conservatives, Rush Limbaugh leading the charge, trying to get a hold of this mass of the Tea Party and try to direct it, because that's basically what it is. It's almost like a chaotic mass of people who are protesting government intervention.
Well, and I would say that that's to some degree is not a bad thing. I believe that, first of all, I would characterize the Tea Party also. I mean, I'm quite sure that there are some Reagan Democrats thrown in there. I believe that,
Sure.
It's a very broad base, and I think that chaos, or whatever you want to call it, is actually a healthy thing, because really that's where good policy breeds, is in healthy and open debate about the issues, rather than policy making taking place behind closed doors without that degree of public input. So I would say that broad base and that sort of chaotic appearance is actually healthy, and actually speaks to the fact that this is not a party that was born out of the Republican Party, but is rather a grassroots movement that is surging and fighting for control, perhaps of the Republican Party rather than the other way around. I think the Democrat Party is long gone. I think that the Democrat Party was co-opted many years ago by far left interests, and I think that the Tea Party is an answer to that.
Anything going unchallenged for any extensive period of time is going to be corrupted in some fashion, and I think that's what I look at the Tea Party. I look at that part of it.
You look at it; it's a reaction. It's a cause and effect. What's going to happen? I mean, you can't say that the Democrats are long gone. I mean, they still control the White House and the Senate. So there is a viable opposition,
I guess I'd have to correct that. When I said the Democrat, I mean the Democrat Party as we knew it in the 60s or the 50s, the party of the average middle class
the Great Society.
American. I don't think that exists anymore, except in the spin that Democratic officials would like to paint the party, and I think to some degree that they're trying to hide the fact that there is an extreme left element to the Democrat Party. And by the way, getting back to a point that was made a little bit earlier, with regard to the Republicans even sliding into more of a big government mode, certainly the second Bush administration, I have some real disagreements with some of the policies that went through his administration.
I think that's what Pete was referring to, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Patriot Act, TARP 1, all of these sort of paternal movements of government where you need government to exist, and they really got their priorities out of shape. And I believe that the Tea Party is, to some degree, the Republican Party sort of being born again and recognizing what its true role in society should be, and that is that more conservative, more deliberative, and a smaller government.
Don't you agree that this is kind of resurging the Republican Party?
Well, I like I said before, I think the Republican Party is just as bad as the Democrats. I mean, look, you just saw in the newspaper a couple days ago, they're having a giant fundraiser at the W Hotel at $10,000, $20,000 a pop, and a lot of the Republican leadership decided not to go because this sends the wrong message. And this was a lot of the freshman congressmen who were coming in, and they were having a fundraiser the week into being in office. Is that what you were
referring to in terms of some infighting going on?
Well,
this changeover?
These guys, look, they get into office for a reason. They're not there to change the world. They're there to either pad their own pockets or they have some sort of ego that they need massaged. And once they get into Washington and they get in that beltway, things very rarely change. I mean, you have an eloquent spokesman in Mr. Ron Paul from the Libertarian Party, and he's been at it for over 30 years trying to change what's going on. And he's written books about the Federal Reserve, et cetera, and the libertarian movement. And you know what? Things had just gotten worse through the 2000s, and the Republicans were just as bad as the Democrats. So it's going to take not just electing people to, change things, because change takes a long time. Look at Obama; he really didn't change so much. He spent a lot more money. But what's going to happen is that right now you're going to have a whole lot of people who are going to be watching the Republicans more than they are the Democrats. And if the Republicans can't hold true to the promises that they've made, for example, on the earmarks, they're going to get thrown out of office. But what's the alternative? Now, if the Republicans get thrown out, they're not going to be voting for Democrats. Who is the third party?
But that's a good point. Where do you go then if you've made such, in my opinion, a fairly drastic change here in this last election, which was the impetus of the call on the.
Well, I think there are some interesting examples too from the last election cycle. I think that really sort of throws a wrench in the whole argument that the Tea Party is merely an appendage of the Republican Party, and that is that there were several Tea Party candidates out there that primaried, and in some circumstances successfully primaried incumbent Republicans. And so
Alaska,
I think,
you mean?
Well, Alaska was one, Delaware was another. There were several of those across the country, both in Congress and the Senate, and also many in the state houses across the country. And I think that's a pretty fair indicator that certainly the Tea Party is not beholden to the Republican Party. And I believe you're right. I think that there will be a significant battle over the next several years as the Tea Party attempts to assert these more conservative values and get them replanted in the Republican Party in a way that they won't just disappear. And I also agree. I think you're right. It's going to be a matter of time. I think it's going to be several election cycles. I do believe the Tea Party is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. I think right now they've sort of backed off a little bit, and they're just in a wait-and-see mode.
I think this movement and the Tea Party is going to spearhead is ongoing. I don't know how much further you both believe as experts.
I mean, you have to also look at what does the Tea Party stand for? What do they think the role of government is? I mean, everybody wants to say, well, the role of government should be what the Constitution says it is.
There's no defined role that I know of, but I do know the purpose was to minimize government, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying is that everybody, the Democrats feel, the role of government is to sort of for the general welfare of society, and which basically opens up a can of worms that they can do whatever they want, in the name of the public good.
Yeah, right.
And you see this on a local level. You see it with affordable housing. You see it with redistricting. You see it with even your property taxes. I mean, when you look at your taxes, and I just got my tax bill, taxes are going up. Mine just went up another $500-600 every year, compounded.
Yeah.
So you have the Democrat Party who's basically labeled themselves as the Great Society, as helping people who are in need. And you look at Obamacare. And the Republicans, for their lack of marketing, have labeled themselves as being the party of no, saying, well, we're not going to be giving that money to charity. But what no one is really talking about is what is the proper role of government? I mean, how does the Constitution define what it is we're supposed to be doing?
It's true. I think the Republicans haven't really been stating that case. They've been saying no, less government, but what?
Exactly.
Right. Well,
how
up until
limited?
recently.
Right.
Up until recently. I mean, I was very impressed with John Boehner's proposal, and then going ahead and opening this new Congress with a reading of the Constitution. It's the first time in history it's ever been done, which I was a little bit surprised to learn.
I was surprised by that too.
But certainly the Constitution is our founding document, and that is what describes the role of government as the framers saw it, and as I believe as the Tea Party sees it. I would say that the Tea Party stands really for three general principles. One of them is fiscal responsibility, accountability of government to the people, and a return to a constitutionally based small federal government.
Do you consider the Republicans more constitutionally oriented in the framing of how government should go?
I believe that the Republican Party was on a slide to the left, just as the Democrat Party was. I think that our society has slid to the left over the last couple of generations or several decades. But I believe that the Republican Party has had a reawakening, and I think that that they see the need to be responsive to this public uprising that is the Tea Party. And
we somehow in that last couple of years in the Bush administration, the word entitlement kept popping up into how they were running business, and that's not typically conservative way to.
No, not at all. That's again, that's big daddy government taking care of feeling that. The government has to take care of all of the individual's needs, and certainly if you read the founding documents and the documents surrounding it, the Federalist Papers and communications that went back and forth between the framers at the time the Constitution was written, that was the last thing they had in mind. In fact, there were statements made by people such as Jefferson and Franklin and Madison that to give government away, to give the people's money away to other people as redistribution, which it wasn't known as that at the time, but that's the concept that they were referring to, could only lead to a downfall.
Yeah, something
of a
for nothing. I
Republican,
can't figure that one out. That's
government.
the
Right.
giving of
Yeah,
something.
but they were allowed to do that because of the Constitution. One of the basic flaws of the Constitution, and you have a lot of people on the right wing or the conservative movement, and now there's this conservative constitutionalism. Everybody keeps running around. They have little pocket copies of the Constitution. They have it in a desk drawer, and everybody's bragging about it. They have Constitution T-shirts and hats. I mean, how many people have actually read it? And if you've read it, you have to understand it. Now, the Constitution gives Congress the right to regulate interstate commerce. That is where you're getting all these laws where throughout the land, you have your EPA, you have your Department of Education. That is the justification for these huge government programs. And also in the Constitution, you have in the opening clause for the general welfare. So when everybody runs around and says the Constitution, we're not following it, they are following it. And the way that it works is that you have a Supreme Court that interprets, that makes decisions based on whether or not they're constitutional. That's part of the system of government that we have. So we've been going through this for over 220 years. And we've been saying, we got to get back to the Constitution. Well, we are back to it. We are enacting it.
Never really left.
We never left it, but that's.
Well, I'd have to disagree with that, only from the respect that I believe that one of the reasons that we have drifted away from some of these principles or lost sight of what the framers' original intent was that we have many judges over the years that have been activists that have really interpreted the Constitution beyond the scope in many, many areas of what the framers originally intended. And so we have wound up with a federal government that is so much larger and so much more pervasive in the individual life than was ever contemplated. What we need to remember is things like the 10th Amendment, and the 17 enumerated powers that the federal government was given in the opening articles of the Constitution, and the fact that those enumerated powers were the only ones that were ever to be wielded by federal authorities, and everything else was supposed to be delegated to the state governments, because remember, at that time, the states were the real sovereign. The individual states were sovereign entities.
But the problem with that is when you have a state that may be violating somebody's individual right or property right, for example, take the civil rights legislation. I mean, states were passing laws, the Jim Crow laws. These people were not allowed to vote. And they were told you can only live in segregated areas. You couldn't vote. You have to be a certain age. You have to show identification, or you have to read something and then sign it. So when a state is violating this, this is an extreme example.
The 14th Amendment,
right?
That was what the 14th Amendment was, and that's how that Commerce Clause was interpreted to eliminate that racist tendency.
Tribal.
Yeah, but I mean, the 14th Amendment was basically extended the rights in the Bill of Rights, forcing the state governments to adhere to those same rights that were guaranteed by the federal level. The problem is that it's gone so far beyond because of the overextension of the Commerce Clause, and now the attempted use of the General Welfare Clause, as one prominent Democrat called it, the Good and Plenty Clause, if I remember correctly.
But you would need to define exactly what you would be cutting out. I mean, for example, is unemployment benefits. Okay, there obviously is nowhere in the Constitution that says people are entitled to a check if they're not working. However, because of the language in the Constitution and the interpretations of it, and you go back to the New Deal when unemployment was first founded, the government was allowed to provide this to people because it was a means of efficiency that if they didn't have a job, they would at least have some type of money because people were basically starving in the streets. So which laws would you repeal or which spending would you cut back? See, a lot of conservatives and Republicans and Tea Parties cut the spending, but just don't cut it in my hometown.
Not in my backyard.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to say, well, what are you going to cut? What are you going to stop spending on? Where are you going to raise the money? Who are you going to tax? So I think people need to be very clear that when, the Tea Party starts running around screaming, waving their Constitution in the air, hey, we're going to cut the spending, but we want a strong national defense. You can't have it both ways.
Let's flip topics just a little bit and talk about term limits or politicians that have been entrenched for quite a while. Might that be an abuse of their power to stay in their office too long?
Well, in my opinion, it could lead to an abuse of power, but it's really the responsibility of the voters to make sure that when those abuses begin to occur, that the voters act and take their responsibility seriously as an American citizen.
Isn't this one of the platforms of the Tea Party?
Term limits?
Yeah, isn't
not that I'm aware. I wouldn't say that. There are certainly some that are advocating for that, and I think there are others that are advocating a little bit more of a purist approach to it, which is that the voters have the ultimate responsibility for making sure that if a particular representative or a senator is not acting in the best interest of his constituency, that the voters need to be educated to that fact and to act in such a way as to remove them from office at that time.
Term limits is not in the Constitution anymore.
No, it
either.
is not. It is not. The other interesting thing about the Constitution I think one of the things that might help to restore some of the power to the states is to repeal the 17th Amendment, which is the 17th Amendment basically took the power of appointing senators away from the state legislators and made it a popular vote. And so now senators, as well as congressmen, the House of Representatives was always the people's house. That was always by popular vote. Whereas the Senate was put in place to assure that the states themselves, that their rights of the state governments were preserved. And so the senators were originally to be appointed by state legislatures. And the 17th Amendment made that a popular vote. So now the senators, as well as the representatives, are only responsive to the people, but not responsive to the state houses. And I think that that's one of the things where we've seen a gradual usurpation and a flow of power to the federal government away from the states since the 17th Amendment was written in 1913.
Well, I definitely would not want the dysfunctional body in Albany, the Assembly of the Senate, picking our state senators because as corrupt as they are, can you imagine who they'd be picking?
Of course.
I mean, if Sheldon Silver had his way, who knows who would be up there? I mean, it's bad enough that we have Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, playing Santa Claus. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I don't think that should be taken away from the general population because I think that
Is that what you were suggesting?
Well, that's where it is right now, is that the Senate is I'm suggesting that I think that the 17th Amendment needs to be repealed and that we need to go back to the original system.
I would definitely not want the state houses to pick the senators. I think that should remain with the people.
Why? I want to go back to something before we only have a couple of minutes left, but the activist judges, I forget who mentioned it before, but there should be a limit to the judiciary's power. Should a judge be able to make such decisions that create an existence without any other input? these activist judges are creating laws out there by making these decisions, especially on the Ninth Circuit.
Well, I guess
tremendous overturning in the Ninth Circuit out there on the West Coast.
I mean, you're referring to what is commonly known as legislating from the bench.
Legislating from the bench,
which is really going beyond what the power of a judge is supposed to be. Now, federal judges, and this goes all the way back to one of the original decisions made by the Supreme Court, which was the Marbury v. Madison case. And that was in the 1780s. I don't remember the exact year that it came down. But the decision basically is that this is the judiciary's role, is to decide what the law is. We look at they take the legislation, and then they apply the legislation to the specific facts that are before them, and then they have to interpret how that legislation impacts on those facts. So in any situation, a judge is going to have some degree of discretion as to how to apply the law. The problem is that when the judiciary becomes political, which it certainly is in this country, because whether it's an elected position or whether it's an appointed position, it's always a matter of politics. So a judge is always going to have a political agenda coming to the bench.
I guess it's hard to avoid some of that stuff, but
human nature.
I think it's part of the reason why the Tea Party also had a great grip. I think a lot of people are tired of seeing other people make decisions without their input.
Well, going back to Marbury versus Madison in the early 1800s, you had a very, with Justice Marshall, it was a very laissez-faire oriented bench. That a lot of the legislation that came up for interpretation or decision, they would say this is not the role of government. It was as much laissez-faire as you could possibly get, probably until the mid-19th century, where you started seeing the rise of the progressives after the Civil War. And I think what ends up happening is that people need to understand that if you don't have a firm understanding of what the proper role of government is, and, on a local level, you see what's called a property rights violation all the time.
Sure.
And when we talk about property rights, but we're not talking about, they won't let me build a shed on my property, or my house I want to make my house bigger and they won't let me. Property rights, as Madison, James Madison interpreted, is that anything that you have a stake in, anything that is yours, should be protected by the government from what he termed either a king or a robber. And he was referring to either a government or some type of criminal. And property being your earnings. And for state and local and federal governments to take your earnings for legislation, for any type of program that is not specific in the Constitution, as Phil was saying, over and above what they're supposed to do, is a violation of your property, because they're taking something that rightfully belongs to you, your earnings, and giving it to somebody else. So I think what you're going to see, that the federal stuff that grabs headlines, it's on the news. But I think what you're going to see on Long Island is a big property tax revolt in 2011.
There's an awful lot of changes coming up in front of us. I think the Tea Party was a successful movement. I think it started something, and I'm happy that it has happened. Thank you very much, Phil Curcio and Pete Nichols. I appreciate it. Societal and political trends are rapidly breaking down the family. Once was a cornerstone of our great American culture, and certainly has changed a lot of things in politics. At FIT, we know you cannot get this information on your own, so we'll bring it to your TV every week, and we always invite opposing views. My name is Chris DiMaggio. Thank you for watching FIT TV, and we'll see you again next week.